So you know how much I love you guys. Here it is. I just got back from the airport. 2 of them popped up this weekend and I wanted to get this information out to you. I'm tired. I've had enough of today, but I'm still gonna get this out to you guys. This is gonna be a good car for somebody. This is VIN 2451. This is a 2017 1J2, which is liquid platinum. So silver as it comes, not gold silver, just silver, with LA20 black interior at Mercedes-Benz of Pensacola, also known as Centennial Imports in Pensacola, Florida, 47,500 miles for $49,000. Little fun fact about this car, this is the first 2017 liquid platinum that has been publicly listed for sale since November of 2022. So almost 4 years since one of these came up for sale previously. And it looks like it's been a Tennessee and Florida car all of its life, kind of split half and half. So we'll dive into things and see if this is any good car. As always, it probably needs brakes and tires. So we'll see if that's the case here as well. Production statistics. Manufactured May 26th of 2017. Should have engine number if you want to pull off the upper cover and look. On the blue intake manifold, it should be 207-2095 should be the engine number if it's the original engine. I have no reason to suspect that it's not. The in-service date is January 30th of 2018. So those are all the numbers. 152 out of the 2,348 cars for all years for the US 49 were 1J2 liquid platinum. Of those, 90, most of them, had LA20 black interior. So basically, if you have a liquid platinum car and if it's anything other than black interior, it's exceptionally rare, but this car is already rare anyway. And then add to the fact that it's a 2017. So 2017, there were only 14 of these cars out of the 342 for the US 49 everywhere except Hawaii wore liquid platinum. And of those, only 8 had LA20 black interior. So this car is rare. The total number in this combo for all years is only 3.83% of all the production. So that's like an 8 or even a 9 out of 10. It's a very rare color. There's not a lot of them that come up for sale, especially, as I said, in 2017, this is the first one in 4 years that's been publicly listed. Not saying there haven't been ones that have privately transacted, but this is the first one in 4 years that has been available to the public. Carfax, Epic VIN, and AutoCheck. Carfax shows this as a 2-owner, 1-accident car, with it being to the right rear in March of 2024, involving a parked motor vehicle. So it sounds like they were parked and were hit, or vice versa, or maybe you backed into somebody, something like that, but right rear. So pay close attention to that. Epic VIN shows this as a 2-owner, 1-accident, matches up with Carfax, same date, to the right rear, and AutoCheck also shows this as a 2-owner, 1-accident, March of 2024. It just says unknown. Sometimes AutoCheck will give more details than the others. In this instance, it does not. So this car is definitely a 2-owner, 1-accident, minor accident, Tennessee and Florida clean title car. Previous sales. So this car first went on sale in July of 2017 for $88,000 in Tennessee, and it sold around February of 2018, so about 7 months for sale to a buyer in Tennessee. September of 2019, $58,000 with 9,200 miles in Tennessee at CarMax, and you can see the pinstripe in the photos there. So you know this car, the pinstripe was not a factory option or anything. It was always an aftermarket add-on or a dealer installed addition. And so this car has the pinstripe. Most likely painted on, could be a decal, but it's probably painted on. And it looks like it sold in about 2 weeks to a buyer in Florida. So from 2019 to 2026, you have Florida ownership. Now here it is, the end of April 2026, $49,000 with 47,500 miles at Centennial Imports, i.e. Mercedes-Benz of Pensacola. So now into the photos. You can see that the car still has the pinstripe, as I just talked about. I can't tell if it has paint protection film on it. When we get into the service history, it did have PPF installed on it when it was new. It looked like originally it was a half hood, and so like partial fenders, partial hood, but then full bumper, mirrors, things like that, and hopefully the carbon fiber piece on the front. But if it does still have the original PPF, if you go and look at this car, I would highly recommend removing it and replacing it right away. 7 to 10 years is kind of the max you want to leave it on before it starts looking like that. and it can get really bad, and it's very difficult to remove, and it becomes very expensive if you pay a shop to remove it. Since it was applied new, I would highly recommend removing and replacing it to keep the paint looking amazing, because it does look like it's in very good shape. Looking at the photos they have of the brakes, looks like it probably needs brakes and needs a very severe wheel cleaning. It looks like it's had years of baked on brake dust that is stuck to the wheels, baked on the wheels. These cars always need brakes and tires. It looks to me like this car needs brakes and tires. I see 2022 date code, so the tires are only 4 years old. But again, when we go to the service history, this car had about 21 to 25,000 miles at the time. So the Michelins usually last around 20,000 miles or so. So the tires are probably getting towards the end of their life. They may have a little bit of life left in them, but just based on mileage alone, and they're not old, they're not like 10-year-old tires, so they're not going to be rock hard or unsafe to drive on. But looks like, to me, it looks like it needs brakes and tires just from a visual aspect, not even getting into the service history. Moving on to the inside, the touch points all look great. The armrest, the seat bolsters, the steering wheel, everything like that. Don't see any issues there. The carbon fiber trim, there's only a couple photos of the interior, but it looks like, and it could be a reflection, but the passenger side dash on the front, it looks like it is starting to delaminate just a little bit. Possibly on the passenger side front door too. Again, if you're gonna go look at this car, or if you're gonna talk to a salesman about it, just ask for more photos of all the carbon fiber trim on the interior, just to make sure you don't see any white spots where it's starting to delaminate. But for right now, it looks like it's in pretty good shape, but it's probably in the future, especially if you take this to a cold climate, I would not be surprised to see it delaminate. The front end, it still looks really good, and that's why I think it was either driven not in a lot of traffic, or it was well washed, well taken care of, or it still has the paint protection film on it, which I think is probably the case. But normally on a partial PPF, you can usually see a line across the hood or the fenders, and I don't see it in these photos, but there's not a lot of photos to go on either. So that would just be another thing you need to look at. As far as the price goes, I think this car is severely under market where it's priced right now, especially considering the last 30 to 60 days. The prices on these cars have shot up tremendously, and this would put this car, if it needed nothing, around the $53,000 to $55,000 range, if not more. And so based on previous auction sales, wholesale auction sales, that it's probably even higher than that. But realistically, I would expect to pay somewhere around $53,000 to $55,000 if it needed nothing. It probably needs brakes and tires, so there's $3,000 right there. So it has an accident on it, goes down about 6 or 8% for that. So you have to adjust down accordingly. So maybe that does put it properly priced if you factor that in. So at $49,000, it probably needs other things, Valley Plate, the other thing, and we'll get into that. But for me, where the market has been, now again, 2017's, it's a lower number of sample data. So the 16s, it's much easier to predict trends and things like that. But the 17, since there's so few of them, this is only the third one for sale here in 2026, publicly for sale so far this year. And so it's really hard to tell. But I think because it needs some things, it's probably priced fairly, if not undervalued if it needed nothing. So I think I don't see any issues really with the price. It's not too high, it's not too low. So now that brings us to the service history. Let's jump into it and see what it has. It's not very well dealer serviced after about 2021. So like in the last 5 years or 30,000 miles, there's not a whole lot on the service history at the dealer. But it looks like after that, it was serviced at places like Pep Boys and some independent shops. So it was still serviced, it just wasn't done at the dealer. So the first entry of note is July of 2017. They installed the pinstripes, the door edge guards, the door cups. That's basically the PPF that's behind where you grab the handle, and they call those door cups. So those were installed there. Again, if they're original and they're still on there, I would probably look at replacing them. Paint protection film on the front, partial hood and partial fenders, including front bumper. So it had PPF and pinstripes basically since it was brand new. March of 2018, 1,700 miles. Scratches they wanted them wet sand and buffed and polished out from the rear bumper and the passenger side. Now it's in 2018. The accident was in 2024, kind of to that same side. Maybe there's a history of backing into things, or certain things in your driveway that don't ever move and you rub up against them or something like that. But there were some scratches that were wet sanded, polished out, probably irrelevant now since that corner was then later replaced, repaired, something like that. So, and I guess related to wet sanding, they now, in April of 2018, they reinstalled the pinstripe again and the JLB recall. That's the high pressure fuel pumps. Most of these cars have that done. Good to see that's out of the way. February of 2020, the KLG customer service program, that is the GPS location. And so it's like reporting incorrectly. There's a fix for it and Lexus covered it. So it's already been done on this car. January of 2021, the last dealer service at 18,000 miles, the 20,000 mile service. And they noted that the driver's front door was not sitting correct. It was not closing, or there was a gap. And the tech found that it looks like the door panel had been taken off and it wasn't properly reinstalled. And I know exactly what that is, having had the door panels off. There's an alignment dowel kind of right there on the inside of the door panel. And if you don't line that up, things get pushed out and they don't fit right. And so that's probably what went on here. But why were they removing the door panel? Could be for speakers, could be for carbon fiber trim delamination, just replacing it out of pocket. If it was out of warranty at the time, this is in 2021, so it probably would have been close to being out of warranty if it was just the standard bumper to bumper. Probably what went on. So it, kind of assumed that the driver's front carbon fiber trim may have been replaced. At that service, it notes that it's going to need front and rear brakes and tires pretty soon at 18,000 miles. 20 to 30,000 miles is pretty typical for the Michelin Pilot Super Sports that originally came with it, or the Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's, and the front brakes. Rear brakes, 40 to 50,000, so it probably really doesn't need rear brakes there. Sounds to me like the dealer's trying to sell them on it, but at basically 20,000 miles, it needed brakes and tires, and that was the last dealer service. So from there on out, it looks like, so they started to service it at the dealer, the second owner, and then they just stopped. And then it was serviced at places like Pep Boys. So 23,000 miles, January 2022, an oil change. 25,000 miles, March of 2022, an evap valve replaced. And I don't see that very much or very common on these cars. What likely happened, and I've seen this on other service histories looking at the dealer service, is the check engine light came on, most likely because the gas cap was not tightened correctly, or it had a faulty O-ring seal on the gas cap. It throws a gross evap leak code. So Pep Boys or this other shop probably looked at it and said, oh, okay, we need to replace the evap valve because, crack out the parts cannon and that'll fix it. Well, personally, I think it was just a loose gas cap and they just paid for something that wasn't needed here. 29,000 miles, December of 2022, an oil change. 30,000 miles, February of 2023, tires replaced. So that kind of jives, 2022 date code, so early 2023. So that's 30,000 miles. It has 47,000 on it now. So yeah, it's got 17,000 miles on the tires. 20,000 miles, 20 to 30,000 miles on the tires. It's going to need tires. 33,500 miles, September of 2023, oil change. 38,000 miles, June of 2024, a new battery and an oil change. So the battery in it now is about 2 years old. 41,000 miles, which is the last service on the Carfax. March of 2025, an oil change. And again, that's the last thing. So it's probably due for an oil change at that, 5,000 miles later. That's where we're at now. So what's not done? Shocks. 17s through 20s had adaptive damping shocks. Don't see where either on Carfax or on the dealer where any of those have been replaced. Do a pre-purchase inspection and see if any of them are leaking. Would not be surprised in the slightest to see any of them leaking. They failed when they had 12 miles on them. Some of them made it to 70 or 80,000 before the first one starts leaking. So look at that and don't be surprised. Don't let that turn you off either. The valley plate, as always, it's gonna be, if it hasn't been done, get it inspected. If it's not leaking, it will be leaking. So put money aside for that. Dealer quotes anywhere between like $2,200, $2,300 and over $3,000. Independent shops, $1,200 to $1,500 is what you would expect to pay, or you can DIY it for about $200 or $300. The most expensive part being the FIPG gasket sealant, or there's a company out there, and I haven't used them yet. It's called Sucker Punch Motorsports. They have a actual gasket for the valley plate instead of using sealant. Why did I not do that on mine? Because it hasn't been out on the market long enough and I don't trust it yet. And so I want to see time and mileage behind it before I commit to something like that, especially if you have to go do it again, you're gonna spend another $2,000, $3,000 to do it. The ZLZ, the sticky, delaminating, deformed dash, that is covered for 10 years from the in-service date on this car. So even though it was made, manufactured, and sold early on in 2017, it was not first sold to a retail customer until January 30th of 2018. That is when it was put into service. So you have until January 30th of 2028. So you have like not quite 2 more years. So if this car's been in Florida, so just check the dash out. If it feels like it's sticky, then just take it to Lexus and they will replace it free of charge. HVAC servo sweep. When you're going to test drive this car, make sure it's fully warmed up. And if you see, like set one side to max hot, one side to max cold, and cycle through everything. Flip sides, make sure everything responds. If it doesn't, then there is a reprogramming available. If the programming doesn't fix it, then you still have bad servos, and some of those, the dash has to come out in order to replace them. It can get expensive. So that's why I have you guys, when you're test driving these, go check that out and make sure everything responds. Front and lower control arm bushings, because this car probably needs tires, it'll be a great way to tell if it needs front lower control arm bushings. Turn the tires all the way, turn the wheels all the way, look at the insides of the front tires, see if you see any excessive wear compared to the rest of the tire. Even though the tires are probably looking pretty worn, if they look more worn on the insides, you probably need to take care of that as well. Brakes and tires. As I said, I'd like drive this point home. These cars always need brakes and tires. This car looks like it needs brakes and tires. Transmission service, I would probably do that. I haven't seen where that's been done. The torque vectoring differential, don't see where that's been done. I would just do those out of an abundance of caution. You can combine it with a 60,000 mile service if you want, run it a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, the fluids in this car are 10 years old. So that includes coolant. Don't see any brake fluid flushes. Speaking of brake fluid flushes, I don't see any brake replacements either, other than maybe Pep Boys, it says brakes checked. That could be actually them replacing the brakes. I'm pretty sure those pads and rotors are not original, but that would be something to look into anyway. Just expect to do brakes and tires. The low pressure fuel pump recall that just came out here a couple of weeks ago in April of 2026, no parts available yet, but you will get a new low pressure fuel pump in this car whenever that becomes available. Just take it by the Lexus dealer and they'll do it free of charge. 60,000 mile service. You have about another 12,000, 13,000 miles before that's due. That's why I said just run the transmission and torque vectoring differential until 60,000 miles and just combine it and do it all in one big service. And then finally, the PPF. As I talked about earlier, if the PPF is original, I would highly recommend replacing it before it gets a real pain to remove and then it costs you a lot more money. So that brings me to, would I buy this car? I think at this price, I probably would in this market, because the prices are going crazy on these cars. I think that $49,000 is a pretty fair price for this car, being a 2017. Plan on doing shocks, valley plate, transmission service, TVD service, and of course, brakes and tires, PPF replacement. You're gonna see, like, basically if you buy this car, it's not ready to go. You're gonna have to spend another $3,000 to $5,000 on day one. And if it needs a valley plate, even more. The valley plate resealed. So that would be things to look at. And some of those can be shored up with a pre-purchase inspection. Take it to a Lexus dealer, pay them a couple $100 to do a very thorough inspection investigation, but tell them to inspect the valley plate, check for any stored codes for the HVAC servos, things like that. And that's what I would do. And at $49,000, I would probably say, all right. The accident was minor. It was several years ago, so that's not a huge concern, and it's a southern car. So Tennessee, Florida for the last 6 or 7 years. So again, I don't see any issues there. Yeah, I think it's worth checking out, especially at this price. I don't think it's going to sit around very long, but yeah, it definitely has the makings of a good one, but just you're not you have to go into it planning to expect to put a little bit more money into it, at least right away, and probably some more later down the line. So that's what I've got for you guys. 2451. I'm going to go edit this video and then I'm going to sleep. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you soon.